She was just a cafe waitress until one reckless comment about a $1 billion algorithm changed everything. He heard it. A billionaire passing by stopped in his tracks. The next morning, she was called into the manager's office. No explanation, no warning. From wiping down tables to standing face to face with one of Europe's most powerful tech CEOs, her life began to shift in ways she never dared to imagine. But what did he really want from her, and why her of all people? This isn't just a story about luck. It's about instinct, missed chances, and a moment no one saw coming. The low hum of the tram rumbled through the streets of Geneva. 5 a.m. Again. Charlotte Meyer rubbed her eyes, silencing the cracked phone screen glowing on the floor beside her mattress. Another day. Another double shift at Vista 44, the glass-walled cafe where billionaires placed million-dollar calls while sipping lattes they barely finished. She pulled her hoodie over her head, glanced at the leaking ceiling one last time, and headed for the door. Just make it through today, solve tomorrow. By 6:45 a.m., she was behind the bar, tying her apron, her name tag barely hanging on Charlotte. No one ever read it. Across the street stood Wolfe Dynamics Tower, home of the most secretive tech empire in Europe. Every Tuesday, their executive team reserved Table 7. She knew their orders by heart. She knew their faces better than they knew hers. But that day, something was different. They weren't just talking, they were arguing. The prediction model won't survive live stress testing. One snapped. If we miss this pitch, we lose Boston. Another hissed. Charlotte's hands tightened on the tray. She knew exactly what they were doing wrong, and before she could stop herself, the words escaped her lips. Actually, you're overfitting the model. You'll hit a recursive loop by phase 3. Silence. 5 executives turned to look at her like she'd just sworn in church. But one man stood slower than the rest. Adrian Wolfe, founder, billionaire, the man who built Wolfe Dynamics from nothing. He looked at her as if she'd spoken in code only he could understand. And you are, he asked quietly. Charlotte swallowed. Charlotte, just your waitress? Adrian nodded once, then turned to his team. Bring her to my office, tomorrow, first thing. Charlotte's heart stopped. Her world was about to shift in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The next morning, when Charlotte arrived at work, something felt off. Before she could even clock in Julienne, the floor supervisor approached her. Charlotte, upstairs. Now the manager wants to see you. The words landed like a punch to the gut. Her throat went dry. Was she being fired? She climbed the narrow back staircase to the cafe's small office. She had barely caught her breath when Mr. Schultz, the cafe owner, looked up at her with an unreadable expression. Sit down, Charlotte. She obeyed, clutching her apron in her lap. I received a very strange request this morning, Schultz began slowly. From Wolfe Dynamics, Charlotte's breath hitched. Mr. Wolfe wants you at his office. First thing tomorrow, no explanation given. Charlotte blinked, certain she had misheard. I don't understand. Why me? Schultz leaned back, folding his arms. That's above my pay grade, but whatever you said yesterday, it clearly got his attention. The next morning, Charlotte arrived at Vista 44 earlier than usual. She hadn't slept. All night, she kept replaying that moment the way Adrian Wolfe had looked at her like she wasn't invisible for the first time in years. She had convinced herself it meant nothing. Maybe it really was nothing. Maybe he'd already forgotten. But when she walked in, Julienne, her floor supervisor, was already waiting by the bar, arms crossed, serious face. Charlotte, to the back office, now. Her stomach dropped. She followed him down the narrow hallway, heart pounding louder with every step. Waiting inside was Mr. Reinhardt, the cafe owner, a man she had barely spoken to in months. Today, his expression was unreadable. Sit down. Charlotte obeyed, clutching her apron in both hands. Mr. Reinhardt cleared his throat. I received a call this morning. Charlotte held her breath. From Terralink Capital, her ears rang. Mr. Wolfe's office. They requested you personally. Charlotte blinked, frozen. Sorry, what? They want you to report to their headquarters across the street. This afternoon. Reinhardt leaned forward, lowering his voice. No explanation given, but it seems whatever you said yesterday didn't go unnoticed. Charlotte swallowed hard. Am I being fired? Reinhardt almost smiled. Fired, no. But let's just say you won't be serving coffee tomorrow. Charlotte sat in stunned silence, trying to process the impossible. Charlotte stood outside the glass tower of Terralink Capital, her reflection staring back at her in the polished doors. She almost turned around, almost walked away. But something deeper, stronger, told her to step inside. The lobby was nothing like she had imagined. No marble, no chandeliers, just sleek steel frosted glass and silence that pressed against her skin. Behind the front desk, a woman in black tapped something on a tablet without looking up. Name Charlotte swallowed hard. Charlotte Meyer, I was asked to come in. The woman paused, checked her screen, and then, without a word, she stood up and motioned toward the elevators. Executive floor. Someone's waiting. Charlotte's legs felt like jelly as she stepped inside the elevator. Floor 48, the top. As the doors closed, she clenched her fists, trying to steady her breathing. What am I doing here? What if this is some kind of joke? But when the elevator dinged open, she knew it wasn't. Standing at the far end of the minimalist lobby was Daniel Koenig, head of strategy at Terralink, infamous for shredding competitors in boardrooms across Europe. He looked exactly like the headlines described him: tall, sharp, ice-cold eyes. He didn't smile, didn't offer a handshake. Follow me. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Charlotte followed, heart hammering in her chest, past glass walls where teams in tailored suits scribbled formulas on digital whiteboards, past names she had only seen on tech news headlines, until they reached a small conference room. Daniel pushed the door open and stepped aside. Inside. Charlotte walked in, and there he was, Adrian Wolfe. Adrian Wolfe stood at the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a tablet. He didn't turn around right away, just stood there like he'd been expecting her all along. Daniel closed the door behind her with a soft click, leaving them alone. Charlotte stood frozen by the door, unsure whether to move or speak. Then Adrian finally turned. Sit. It wasn't a question. Charlotte sat. Her palms were damp, pressed tightly against her knees. Adrian studied her in silence for a long moment, like she was something under a microscope. Then finally, "You surprised me yesterday." Charlotte swallowed. "I didn't mean to, but you did." His voice cut through her apology before it could form. He took a slow step closer, setting the tablet down on the table between them. "Do you know what this is?" He turned the screen toward her. It was the model diagram, the one they'd been arguing over at table 7. Charlotte leaned forward before she could stop herself. "Your prediction loop. It's overfitted to historical data." Adrian's jaw flexed just slightly, like he already knew she'd say that. "And you fixed it in your head over coffee." Charlotte's throat tightened. She could feel the heat rising in her face. I didn't mean to interfere. I just saw it." Adrian leaned back, arms crossed, watching her like she was the most interesting thing he'd seen all year. "You didn't just see it," he said softly. "You understood it." Charlotte bit her lip. "I used to work on models like this. Before you ended up serving cappuccinos to people who never looked you in the eye." Charlotte flinched, but she didn't deny it. Adrian leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make her lean in too. "I didn't call you here to embarrass you, Charlotte. I called you here because I'm about to put my company's future on the line in 48 hours. And I need someone in that room who knows when we're bluffing ourselves." Charlotte stared at him, not daring to breathe. "You saw the flaw when my team couldn't. I want you in that pitch." Charlotte's mind went blank. She opened her mouth, closed it again. I think you've got the wrong person." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. I don't belong in rooms like that." Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just leaned back, crossing his arms tighter. "Says who?" Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. "Look at me," she whispered, motioning to herself. "I'm a waitress." Adrian's lips twitched like she'd just told him a private joke. "No, you're not. You're the only person who caught a flaw my senior team missed after 6 months of R&D." Charlotte felt the walls closing in. Her throat tightened. "I'm not ready for that kind of pressure. I'm not trained to pitch to billionaires." Adrian leaned forward again, this time slower, his voice like a quiet hum in the heavy air. "I'm not hiring you for polish, Charlotte. I'm hiring you for clarity. And whether you realize it or not, you already did the hardest part." Charlotte's head spun. She wanted to run. She wanted to say no. But deep down, something else whispered louder. What if this was the moment you'd been waiting for? Her fingers trembled slightly as she whispered, "What exactly would you need me to do?" Adrian's expression didn't change, but his next words made her heart stop. "Be in that room. Stand next to me. And when they try to tear this model apart," he leaned in one last inch, "prove them wrong." Charlotte sat frozen. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Every instinct screamed run, run back to the cafe, back to the only life she knew how to survive. But then, another voice whispered louder, "What if you don't? What if you walk away?" And this was your only shot. She looked down at her hands, still shaking, still unsure. But then she remembered the way Adrian had stopped, the way he had listened, the way he had called her here. No one had ever done that before. She swallowed hard, lifted her head, looked him in the eye for the first time. "I'll do it." Adrian didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He just nodded, once, slow. "Good." He stood buttoning his jacket like the meeting was already over. "My team will brief you in 1 hour." "You'll work directly with Daniel Koenig." Charlotte flinched. "He doesn't seem to like me very much." Adrian actually let out the faintest breath of a laugh. "Daniel doesn't like anyone, but he respects results." He paused at the door, glancing back at her one last time. "Prove him wrong, too." And with that, he was gone, leaving Charlotte alone staring at the empty chair where the most powerful man in the building had just made her a player in the biggest game of her life. Charlotte sat alone for what felt like forever, every second ticking louder than the last. Then, the door creaked open again. Daniel Koenig stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Follow me." No warmth, no welcome. Charlotte stood clutching her hands to hide the fact they were still trembling. Daniel led her into a glass-walled strategy room. Screens on every wall, data streams scrolling in real time. A war room built for killers in suits. "Sit." Charlotte obeyed, but her throat tightened again. Daniel paced in front of her like a prosecutor preparing his case. "First rule," he snapped, "you don't speak unless I tell you to." Charlotte flinched but nodded. "Second rule," he leaned forward, planting his hands on the table, "you keep up." He tapped a remote. On the screen flashed complex algorithm maps. "Walk me through it." Charlotte hesitated. "All of it." "No," Daniel bit out. "Just the part you called out yesterday." Charlotte leaned in, fingers tracing the air just above the screen. "Your data inputs are too narrow," she began softly. "You're training the model on safe market conditions, but your pitch promises real-time volatility management." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Show me." Charlotte stood, hands moving faster now, pointing to the error loop, suggesting a different input flow. Layer by layer, she rebuilt the section they had argued over the day before. The room went dead silent. Daniel straightened slowly, watching her like she'd just crossed an invisible line. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, a single nod. "You're in." Charlotte's breath hitched. "That's it." Daniel grabbed a tablet and tossed it onto the table. "Be ready at 7 tomorrow, full team run-through." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Surprise me again, and maybe I'll start believing Wolfe isn't wasting his time." And then, just like Adrian before him, Daniel disappeared, leaving Charlotte alone again, but this time, not invisible. 7:00 a.m., sharp. Charlotte stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor where the core team of Terralink Capital had already gathered. They sat around a long glass table. Suits, laptops, deadly serious faces. And not a single one of them looked happy to see her. Daniel stood at the front, flipping through slides. He didn't even glance up when she entered. "You're late," he muttered, though she was exactly on time. Charlotte swallowed her nerves and took the empty seat at the far end of the table. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "All right," Daniel began. "Boston is in less than 48 hours. This is our one shot." He clicked to the next slide. A timeline, pressure points, expected investor questions. Not once did he mention Charlotte. Not once did anyone in the room look her way. Charlotte sat there, gripping her pen like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Then, without warning, Daniel snapped his fingers in her direction. "Meyer, you catch that last point?" Charlotte's heart nearly stopped. "I what?" "The data delta from live market variance. Explain it, right now." Every head in the room finally turned to look at her. Charlotte's mind screamed run, but her mouth somehow started to move. "The delta you're showing is off by 3%. 'Cause your model's still referencing week-old data sets." A beat of silence. "You need to resync the live stream before Friday, or the predictive curve will flatline mid-demo." Someone at the table let out a low whistle. "She's right," another murmured, pulling up their own laptop to check. Daniel's jaw clenched, but this time, he didn't argue. "Noted," he said flatly. Then looking directly at Charlotte, "You're on slide 12 tomorrow? Don't freeze." Charlotte exhaled, hands shaking beneath the table, but somewhere deep inside, something shifted. For the first time since she had walked through that door, they were listening. The private jet landed in Boston under a sky as gray as Charlotte's nerves. She sat silently near the back of the cabin while Daniel and the executive team reviewed slides one last time. No one spoke to her, not even Adrian. She kept telling herself she wasn't really part of this, that she could still back out, slip away, disappear. But every time she thought about standing up, she saw Adrian's face again. "I want you in that pitch." The next morning, they walked into the Chamberlain Investment Group's glass fortress, the boardroom buzzing with investors flown in from all over the world. At the center of it all stood Graham Ellis, the man holding the billion-dollar checkbook. "Welcome, Mr. Wolfe," he greeted coldly. "You've got 30 minutes. Impress me." Adrian nodded once. No smile, no small talk. Daniel kicked off the presentation flawless, polished, every slide hitting like clockwork. Charlotte sat off to the side, pulse pounding louder with every word. Then, slide 12. Daniel paused, turned to her. Charlotte walked them through the live prediction model. Charlotte stood slowly. She could feel them all watching, judging, wondering why a waitress was standing in a boardroom filled with billionaires. Her throat went dry, her palms slick with sweat. She almost choked, almost crumbled. But then she remembered. "You already did the hardest part," Adrian's words echoed like armor. Charlotte cleared her throat, lifted her chin, and began. "As you can see," she started, her voice steadying, "our current model doesn't just predict based on historical data. It adapts in real time, pulling live feeds from over 50 market variables globally." She clicked to the next slide, highlighting the flaw she had caught. "And here is where your competitors fail. They chase patterns that no longer exist. We don't." The room fell silent. "Impressive," Graham finally said, leaning back. "But what happens when the model breaks under live market stress?" Charlotte didn't flinch. "It doesn't." She stepped closer, locking eyes with him. "Because I already broke it last week and rebuilt it to withstand exactly that." For the first time all day, Adrian Wolfe smiled. The meeting ended. Just like that, no applause, no reactions, no verdict. The investors stood shaking hands with Adrian and Daniel, polite, formal, but no one said, "You've won." Charlotte stood off to the side, frozen, terrified that she'd read the room wrong, that it had all been for nothing. Adrian walked toward her, his expression unreadable. He stopped just inches away. Charlotte couldn't breathe. "We'll hear back in a week," he said quietly. Her heart sank, but then he leaned in, lowering his voice just for her to hear. "But between you and me, we already won." By the time they landed back in Zurich, the news had already broken. Terralink Capital Secure's historic deal with Chamberlain Group, photos of Adrian shaking hands with Graham Ellis, flooded every business outlet. But in every official statement, one name kept appearing. Model breakthrough credited to Charlotte Meyer, Terralink's newest data strategy consultant. Charlotte stared at the headlines, her breath catching in her throat. It didn't feel real, but it was. 2 days later, she walked back through the glass doors of Terralink, not as a visitor, not as a waitress, but as part of the team. Daniel was waiting by the elevator, arms crossed, same unreadable face. "Took you long enough," he muttered. But this time, there was the faintest trace of respect in his voice. Adrian joined them a moment later, nodding toward the glass conference rooms ahead. "You ready to do this for real?" Charlotte swallowed, smiled, and nodded. "Let's build something they'll never see coming."